Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ishika Kothari, and I'm the founder and executive director of Take Action Inc. I hope you all are well and healthy during these difficult and unprecedented times. With systems of oppression and racial injustice persisting today, and countless other issues arising from COVID-19 pandemic, informed youth leaders and activists are needed more than ever to spur meaningful change. So we created this activism workshop series so that we can get a step closer to this goal by learning more about social justice issues and getting exposed to as many perspectives as possible. I'm so excited to begin the activism workshop series with Art and Resistance Through Education, or ARTE. Marissa Gutiérrez Vicario, the founder and executive director of ARTE, will be running this workshop with the help of ARTE team member Jordan French. As a committed human rights and peace-building activist, artist, educator, and advocate for youth, Marissa launched ARTE in 2013 to help youth people amplify their voices and organize for human rights change in their communities through the visual arts.
Thank you so much to Take Action Inc. for inviting us to be a part of this series. I know folks are at home right now and have been dealing with a lot of things that have been happening in the world, in our communities, but the fact that you're all here and willing to learn about Artivism and willing to take action, I'm so grateful. So thank you so much. This hour, we're going to talk about the intersection of art and activism, or Artivism. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll discuss issues related to mass incarceration and what we call the criminal injustice system. And we'll also be talking a little bit about, what is prison abolition, also exploring what zines are, if people have heard of zines before, and how they're used as a tool for making change and taking action. And also, we'll do a little bit of zine creation. Also, one thing we want to mention, mass incarceration, prisons, jails, all these things, it's a much larger workshop. We're just getting you started. So we hope this is one step into a lifelong learning in your own community. So thank you. So on the next slide, I'm just going to talk a little bit about ARTE and why we do the work we do. So we're currently based in New York, and we work to engage young people around human rights through the visual arts. And so specifically in the past, you can see some of our other slides on the next slide. We've worked a lot with murals and muralism, and that's not the only art form that, and this is also another project which I'll explain. It's not the only art form that we use, but it's one of the many. And thinking about how do we transform our world using art. At the core of everything we do is we use human rights and the human rights framework. So this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We worked with another organization called Thought Matter to redesign this so that we can make human rights more accessible to folks everywhere. So we actually printed out 4,000 copies of this document. You can see it on our website, and you can actually request a copy from us if you'd like. But the idea that human rights aren't something that are just at the United Nations, they're not just something that is only for lawyers, only for certain folks in government. It's for everyone, and how art can make human rights come alive, and how art can help people better understand what their own human rights. The following slides we have here are just some other examples. This was an art piece that we did in Queens, working with a group of immigrant students who wanted to show to their community about immigrant rights and show them who they were and stand for things that were important to them. So it says, without the weight of discrimination, we can fly. And they actually featured some of their own artwork within this art piece. On the next slide, you'll see an example of some more group of students focusing actually on prison and what happens to women and their families and other folks who are affected by the criminal justice system. On the next slide, you'll see, I'm really, really proud of this. This was a mural that we did with students in West Harlem. And it was actually a collaboration between folks who are incarcerated, young people who are incarcerated, and other folks on the outside who wanted to honor the legacy of the incarcerated students. And they both together created a project which is called Global Women Heroes, which we're really proud of. This slide, just to show you really quickly, it was an example of a zine project that we did, and we'll talk more about zines that it's also offered on our website, and talking about how folks, communities, members can reclaim their own human rights. And we took different aspects of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they actually incorporated into their own human rights that they're experiencing in their own communities. So Artivism. This is a more simple definition, but that literally the intersection of art and activism, and an art medium used for social change. So like I said, with everything that we do with ARTE, we're figuring out ways, how can we talk about human rights? How can we talk about activism? How can we talk about social justice issues that are really important to us using the visual arts? So on the next slide, we have a definition that I really love from Artivism galleries, and I'll read it for you all. And you know, there's no one definition. You know, we're always, as artists, we're always recreating what art means to us, our relationship to art. But one definition is Artivism is the combination of art and activism that uses creative expression to spread awareness of social justice issues. So artivists challenge the social and cultural norms by bringing personal and often private issues to light that sparks dialogue for conversation. So through pen, paintbrush, graffiti, spoken word, theater, sculpture, and other art mediums not even listed here, artivists intervene upon public spaces to make a political statement. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about prison and jail and also racial justice and some of the other issues that you all brought up. This again was a piece that our students did, I had mentioned before, on focusing prison as a feminist issue. So one thing you'll notice, and one thing that's really important in Arte is, like, you know, what symbols, how can we use certain symbols to talk about larger issues? So you'll see here is like the symbol for women, often used in several different capacities, and then the ideas of like handcuffs, and so the idea of like, what does it mean for women to be free? So very simply, I was really proud of students that we worked with, you know, taking this very large issue and figuring out symbols and like, again, emojis, like very simple art ideas to convey larger social justice issues and at least spark dialogue around it, right? On the next slide, we'll delve into a little bit of the issues. So like I mentioned, Arte does a lot of work on racial justice and also focusing on equity and also thinking about the mass incarceration system. One thing we do prior to COVID, we worked with students at Rikers jail in New York City. We worked with students to do art workshops, talking about human rights, talking about issues that directly impact young people, right? So we realized that while we work with students and we want to be there for students until the jails until there aren't any more jails, we also recognize we're a piece of a larger context, right? So, a larger criminal justice system that we're now seeing so many more folks are thinking about and taking interest in, and understanding that we have a problem in the US. First off, there are over 2.2 million people incarcerated in the US right now. I don't believe that number includes also folks on parole or also just folks that are involved in the criminal justice system. The US, if folks don't already know, has the highest incarceration rate of any other country in the world, which is, and we can talk a little bit more about why that is, but also just the fact that so many people are incarcerated, and that doesn't also take into account the folks that, the family members, children, all the other people who are impacted indirectly. One startling fact is also that more than 60% of incarcerated folks are folks of color. And that includes a disproportionate amount of Black folks and Latinos. And lastly, in the past 40 years, incarceration has increased by 400%. COVID also impacts folks in jails in very harmful ways. You know, of course, this pandemic has affected so many people have died outside, but also thinking about what are the impacts of this virus for people in the incarcerated folks on the inside. So the COVID-19 death rate in prisons is 3 times higher than the general public. And right now, 530 incarcerated people have died of COVID-19. And these stats, I think, are even larger, unfortunately. 7 out of 10 of the largest COVID-19 outbreaks have been in prisons and in jails. And lastly, like I said, the number of known incarcerated folks with COVID-19 is 68,000. And that number is rising. The other thing that to mention too is, like, when people are in jail, they can't social distance, obviously. Like protective equipment, personal protective equipment is not readily available for folks. You know, people are just in such a tight proximity to each other, so that also spreads the virus even more so, and how dangerous that can be for folks who literally cannot leave their spaces. So this is just kind of a really quick briefing of what's going on. And when we think about prisons, we also think of this thing called the prison industrial complex, right? So the idea that prisons in themselves exist in this kind of infrastructure that has been created because of the war on drugs and crime, because the idea that prisons are being privatized and people are making money off the physical bodies of folks in jail. that's something that we really recommend you thinking about and reaching out for more information, and we can send more information after this workshop. Thinking about how this also the historical legacy of slavery and racism. Some people have talked about racial injustice, racial inequity, how that also props up this prison industrial complex. And then also, of course, the over-policing of communities of color. Right now, we're seeing the campaigns and kind of the push, for by the Movement for Black Lives and other organizations, that the idea of like defunding the police and how this is all intertwined to the system of the prison industrial complex. In the next slide, though, we believe that, thinking about like, what is this? So we also understand that there's not one definition. These are just, these are other definitions that from other organizations. And this is an organization called Critical Resistance, which you should all check out. But, it is a term that is used to describe the overlapping interest of government and industry that use surveillance, and like I mentioned, policing and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems. Next slide. This is the one this is the one that gives me the most hope and is most exciting. So the idea of like, when we think about prisons and prison abolition, as kind of counteracting the slide you saw with the pillars, the idea that we also believe that communities can find their own solutions, and that there can be a more peaceful, restorative, for lack of a better word, way of thinking about prisons. And actually, instead of restorative, we're also using the word now transformative justice and healing practices. So the idea that we can transform these punitive kind of systems that we have in place. And the idea that we can invest in communities and community-based solutions and reparations. And the idea that like, by giving money for schools and healthcare, that we can avoid adding and building up the prison industrial complex. And then lastly, thinking about access to jobs. So folks being able to make money to support their families and support themselves, to have housing, and also the idea that in this kind of framework that we're presenting, the idea that people have access to mental health resources that are so critically needed. And these are, again, please look this up for yourself. We're only presenting ideas for you to think about, but there are folks who have been involved in this work for decades and decades, and some kind of ideas that they're put out there, including Wilson Gilmore, is the idea that abolition isn't about presence, or is about presence, forgive me, but not absence. So the idea that we're building life-affirming institutions. Dr. Angela Davis talks about how prison relieves us of the responsibility of seriously engaging with the problems of our society. So especially those produced by racism and increasingly global capitalism. So the idea that like when a harm happens in a community, the idea with prisons, we put people away and we make them invisible, and it's a way of us not having to deal with the actual core root of these problems. And lastly, from the Slacktivist, and this is a social media account you can follow, it's not the full quote, but it's a piece of it, is the idea that prison abolition is about reimagining justice and accountability. And we use art as one way that we use art as a way to reimagine what the world could look like. So please look this up for yourself and formulate your own ideas and opinions. One way that we educate people on these issues is by creating art, and like one form of that is called zines. So people have heard of it before. On the next slide, we'll see that we're going to talk, give you a little bit of overview on what a zine is, right? So these are some examples. I actually have also some examples that in the physical copies, but very quickly, for those that don't know, a zine is, on the next slide, please. A zine is so again, they're short for fanzine or fan magazine, and the idea is that these are publications that are distributed in specific groups. They're often self-published. They're published in small numbers. They're inexpensive or free. You could say that if you want to. They allow for frequently unheard voices to express themselves. They're a viewpoint outside of mainstream media, and they're meant for expression of ideas and art and to connect people and to spread information. So I think that, yeah, so people can think about how to, people can use it however they want and to be able to spread their own ideas and information that's different from the mainstream media. Next slide. So this is not a zine, but this is a comic that was made during the civil rights movement. So the idea that art from a very, the intersection of art and activism has always been around. So the idea that this is something that while Dr. Martin Luther King was organizing the civil rights movement, there was this comic called Montgomery Story that was actually passed around, distributed to folks to spread information about the civil rights movement. So you can see this is like, again, not necessarily a zine, more of a comic, but something that folks use to spread information. Next slide. Again, these are some other ideas. And I want to share that, like, these are like, zines can be made about anything, right? So you see there's one about Basquiat, there's one about ice cream flavors, there's one about how to make a sandwich. Like, it could be literally about anything that people choose to have. And frequently can be made about activism. So we asked you, I know that, you know, not everyone has access to materials right now, and we want to recognize that, but we also wanted to give you a quick overview of kind of what materials, if you had an ideal world, you could use. But definitely with zines, you can have as little or as much as you want. One is, you know, at the very minimum, having pieces of paper. I mentioned also scissors and some kind of markers. So over here, like, we'll show you, this was a zine that someone made, and they included different, like, they used like magazine cutouts, right? So they did a few of these. They had some glue stick is always helpful. We work, like I said, we work in jail with young folks all the time, and they don't have a lot of material. So zine is a simple way that we can pre-cut things for them, and they can make their own drawings. So so how to fold a zine, and hopefully if you want to do it together, we can also do it together, or you can learn and then do it later on your own. We'll show you the graphic first, and then I'll do a demo, just because the graphic is kind of, it can be a little bit difficult. Some people get it really quickly and some people don't, and there's no rush. So on the next slide, you'll see the graphic. And people kind of consider it like a 6-step process, but your first step, and actually we'll use, and like I said, this works for any type of paper. So this is a 11-inch by 17. So it's even kind of hard to see. And this is like an 8.5 by 11, your standard computer paper. So for folks following along, your first step is you're going to fold your piece of paper. And so fold it. And the idea is you're trying to get 8 squares. So you're going to fold it again. So again, that would be quarters. So yeah, like you fold it like this. And then you're going to fold it one more time. Okay. So you should have a kind of like this mini book thing. The idea is once you get it into the quarters, or now it's 8, you're going to unfold it. So, and then the next is you're going to take it like this, and you're going to fold it in half. So the idea is that you want the closed side to be facing this way. And the next thing you're going to do is, if you can see, there is, I'll make a little dot. There is a dot right here. You're going to cut on this line. So you can even rip it if you don't have scissors. Cut on the line. So it's open like this. So this flap should be open. And the idea is you're going to fold it like this. So it's going to be this length. So people should be here. And you'll notice that the open part kind of folds into a diamond shape. And once you get this diamond shape, you're going to pop it like this. And the idea is that you're going to fold it like this. So the idea is you have 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, 4 page. And the idea is also that you can open it up and create like a poster of sorts. So we did this with, I'll show you the example. For Arte's one, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, and the idea is that you could open it up and it could become a poster of sorts. We, thanks to Jordan especially, have compiled a list of facts for you to think about and for facts to use as to get you started. Again, we always encourage you to do your own research if you want to, but it's something to get you started. These are some specific facts focused on the prison industrial complex, on prisons, on incarceration. And we're going to ask you to choose maybe one or two of those facts from the document. So if you go to bit.ly zine prison facts, which is in the chat, thank you for doing that. It'll take you to a Google Doc, and you can use it to choose one or two facts to start with. And the idea is that you're going to start creating your own zine by with using one of those two first facts. So, you can use this as, if you want, as the cover, and if you want, you could put one of the facts in here, and you can try to also do a visual depiction of that fact. So we're going to show you a quick example of a zine on the next slide that was done by this incredible artist that we love, Paige Adamczak, and she was also a volunteer working at the jail prior to COVID-19, working with students, and she wanted to create art because she felt very overwhelmed and sad that she couldn't see the students anymore. Like, it was a very abrupt, when we said we didn't know that was the last time we saw students was going to be the last time we talked to them. So it was a very abrupt ending to this program where she had built relationships with folks and gotten to learn and work with these students in jail. So she created this zine, and it was called Stuck, a zine on COVID-19 in jails. And that was kind of her cover. And on the next slide, I'll go over this really quick because you can take a look on the website if you want for yourself. But she was also kind of real, having worked at Rikers, she saw a little bit of where people ate and slept and kind of how close the space was. So for her, she was talking about how what social distancing meant, for example, and she used the zine to depict that. On the next slide, you'll see she talked a little bit about, again, people can look up Rikers Island for themselves, or any other jail that might be of interest of you. But she was also talking about how viruses get transmitted into places. Next slide. And this, so she took some of stats, and these are some older stats. Again, she created this right after, really towards the beginning of quarantine, I should say. So she also used it as she used her zine as a space to talk a little bit about statistics and and to make, like I said, present the information to folks in a more interesting and also a way for people to remember a little bit better. You can take, if you're looking at that Google Doc, take one of those slides, take one of those facts and think about how would you depict that in a way that might make it more easy for people to understand, right? So, I've seen, so for example, if we take 2.2 million people in prison or jail in the US, I've seen images where people take an outline of the United States and maybe they write 2.2 million, or they put different images of people, or they use an icon to represent a certain amount of people, and that is the total number. Or for example, there's one of the facts is 1 out of 50 children living in the US have a parent who's incarcerated. Maybe you could draw something that represents that number and have it shaded in. So there's very interesting ways that you can depict this information. It doesn't have to just be all numbers. People to please share your art if you want to. One is, so on our website, there's a place called Free Them All. It actually, Paige gave us permission to share her zine. So you can take a look and look at the zine more in depth and use it as inspiration for your own zine. You can tag us. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter with that same link, Arte Justice, #World Without Incarceration if you want. But we usually have a quote that we want to end with. But one quote we really love, people recognize this, is Frida Kahlo, Mexican artist, muralist, who talked about, this is one of her quotes: "Nothing is absolute, everything changes, everything moves, everything revolves, everything flies and goes away." And we love this quote. We've been inspired by a lot of Frida's work over really the last few years, but also the idea that I know folks are in quarantine, I know it feels like the pandemic isn't going to go away, but the idea that things will change and things will get better, and eventually we'll be able to see each other. One day, hopefully we'll meet in person and we'll have that space. And then also the idea that I know we often tell our young people, it often feels like things aren't going to change and the human rights violations are always going to be the same. But from my personal experience, we're seeing this uprising of folks who are trying to take a stand for things that they believe in. And the idea that art is one way that people can make change, and the idea that we can move towards equity and we can address some of the human rights violations that exist. So I'm grateful to you all for being here, and you know, even questioning kind of the way things are, I think is one step, and even creating art and again, imagining possibilities of what life can be, I think is one step moving closer to a better world. So I really appreciate that. Stay in touch. Again, grateful that you all are here and this is a youth space for folks, and thank you for letting us in here. You can visit our website if you want. You can, again, please feel free to create art and tag us if you'd like. And if you have any questions, you can email us. But thank you again, and good luck with everything.